My beloved child, the heavens paused when I saw your heart bow instead of break, when you could have chosen the escape that most would take. But instead, you stayed, trembling and afraid, yet firm in me. You didn't just obey me when it was convenient. You obeyed when it demanded the death of your comfort, the rejection of your logic, and the isolation of your soul. I watched you standing at the edge of your own Red Sea, feeling the pressure to flee, to vanish into the background, to give up on what I said, but you stood, even if barely, and that was enough for me to move. You didn't need to be strong, you only needed to be still. You didn't run to the world, you ran to my will. I know the weight of that moment, the battle that no one saw, the tears you wiped before anyone could notice. I was there in the silence, in the aching pull between compromise and calling. Every force tried to distract you, derail you, deceive you, but I saw your trembling hand still reaching for mine, your broken heart still leaning toward my voice. You proved to hell that you weren't made of weakness, but of surrender, and that type of surrender terrifies the enemy. That obedience wasn't small. It was warfare in the spirit realm. It wasn't just a decision. It was a declaration that you belonged to me, no matter the cost. My angels took note. The darkness that followed wasn't punishment. It was retaliation, because your yes shook something eternal. When you wanted to disappear, you chose to stay hidden in me instead. And that, my child, is where I do my greatest work, not in the spotlight, but in the shadowed places where your quiet obedience screams louder than any platform ever could. I am proud of that moment. I recorded it. I honored it. And now, I will reward it. Because you did run away, I'm about to run toward you with a speed and force that no opposition can stop. The seed of that obedience is about to break open the ground beneath your feet. And as you stood there wondering if I saw you, let me say this clearly. I not only saw you, I wept with joy. You thought you were being ignored, but you were being carved into something rare. You thought nothing was changing, but your obedience shifted timelines. You bent, but you didn't break. You cried, but you didn't quit. And now, my child, because you did that, because you didn't run when the door looked wide open to escape, I am about to do something that eyes haven't seen and ears haven't heard, and this is only the beginning. And then came the voices, loud, manipulative, persistent, trying to flood your mind with confusion, dread, and hesitation. Fear rose up like a tidal wave, threatening to wash away the clarity you had received in the secret place. But you didn't let that fear win. You chose faith when every fiber of your body screamed for security. You stood in a battlefield of thoughts, and instead of letting terror take control, you tightened your grip on my promises. Your faith didn't look perfect, but it was genuine. I never asked you to roar. I only needed you to whisper, "I still believe." And you did. You clung to me when the future was foggy, when the outcome seemed impossible, when nothing aligned with what I had spoken. That, my child, sent tremors through the unseen realm. You need to understand this. Demons flee not when you shout, but when you trust me in trembling silence. Fear tried to distort your vision, paint disaster over your destiny, inject panic into your soul, but you cast it down, not by force, but by resting in what I said. You didn't allow anxiety to be your master. You refused to let worry rewrite your story. And even when fear knocked relentlessly, you didn't let it move in. You fed your spirit instead of your doubts. You spoke truth even when you felt none of it. Do you realize how precious that is to me? You didn't wait for your emotions to agree. You moved forward anyway. That is what pleased heaven. Not the absence of fear, but the choice to not bow to it. I celebrated that moment. Angels circled around you and sang psalms of strength over your obedience. I marked that day as a turning point. Because you didn't collapse under the pressure, I began to position things for your deliverance. I saw you walk through that fog, your legs shaking, your eyes wet, yet still saying, "I will not go back." You passed a test that few even recognize they are taking. You fought without shouting. You resisted without anyone applauding. But all of heaven saw it. And I smiled. I watched your enemies grow frustrated as every trap they set didn't work because you chose belief over panic. That was the day I whispered louder into your spirit, confirming that I was near. And though you may not have heard me clearly, your spirit caught it, and you kept moving. You didn't need full understanding. You only needed full surrender. And that you gave me. So now watch, because that invisible stand you took is about to manifest visible evidence. You silenced fear's influence, and now I will silence what once threatened to steal your peace. You stripped fear of its authority by elevating my truth, and now I will elevate you where others thought you'd be paralyzed. Fear will no longer be a wall. It will become your witness, a sign of what you overcame in me. My child, your faith whispered louder than your fear ever screamed, and that is why your next season will not be delayed. I'm unlocking what was withheld. I'm revealing what was hidden. I'm commanding what was stuck to shift. Because when you trusted me over your terror, you opened the floodgates of divine response. And now, we move forward. There were moments when you walked alone, applauding others while your own hands remained empty. You stood in the back, unnoticed by those you supported, uncelebrated by the ones you blessed, and yet, you didn't stop. You carried burdens behind closed doors, prayed when no one asked you to, gave when no one saw the cost, and you never demanded recognition. That, my child, is rare. In the world's eyes, you were hidden, but in my eyes, you were radiant. I saw your internal battles, the decisions you made to keep your heart pure even when bitterness would have been justified. I watched you swallow your frustration when you weren't thanked, yet still poured out your love without hesitation. I know how heavy that silence was. I know how you questioned, not me, but yourself, wondering if what you were doing even mattered. It did. Every unseen act echoed through the heavens. Every unnoticed seed was planted in eternal soil. Every time you chose to serve in silence, you were sowing into a harvest that cannot be stolen. I heard the sighs you breathed out after blessing those who forgot you the moment they were lifted. I was near when you stayed behind to clean up what others left undone. You didn't announce your goodness. You lived it. You didn't post your generosity. You buried it like treasure, trusting me to water it in secret. My child, your hidden obedience is more powerful than public approval. This world has trained people to chase claps, but you chased my heart, and that changed everything. You walked away from rooms that refused to see you, because you knew I had called you to a higher place. You released applause because you didn't need validation to know you were mine. And now, I'm calling those unseen victories forward. I'm breathing on those quiet decisions you made in the shadows. I will reward what men never acknowledged. I will restore what was overlooked. I will reverse every lie that told you were irrelevant. You are not invisible to me. You were never working in vain. Your private sacrifices reached me louder than the world's loudest stages. And because you did not demand to be seen, I will now cause you to be noticed in places you never stepped into before. This season, I'm amplifying the sound of your surrender. I'm revealing the fruit of your consistency. The ones who passed over you will wonder how you were positioned so quickly. But they didn't see what I saw. They didn't hear your late-night prayers. They didn't feel your heartbreak after giving your best. They didn't witness how you kept loving when love wasn't returned. But I did. And now I'm lifting you. Not for attention. Not for applause. But because you proved to me that your motivation was me all along. And this is what brings me joy. A child who doesn't just perform when the lights are on, but one who worships when no one is looking. That's who you are. That's what you did. That's why I'm proud. Now watch how I begin to expose the roots of every quiet seed you've sown, and pour favor over it until the branches stretch beyond what your past could ever contain. Because the hidden ones are the ones I trust with glory. There came a point when your strength gave out, not because you were weak, but because you had reached the edge of what human hands could carry. You stood in a place where logic failed you, where reasoning only deepened your ache, and where every option around you screamed, "Fix it yourself." But instead of grasping for control, you let go. not out of defeat, but out of devotion. You didn't try to manipulate the outcome. You didn't force doors to open. You didn't settle for your own way just to feel in charge. You took your hands off what was crushing your peace, and that was the moment I could finally take over. That surrender, my child, was the loudest act of faith you've ever performed. You chose trust over turmoil, release over resistance, and you dared to believe that I could hold what you couldn't even understand. You placed your future into my hands not because it looked beautiful, but because you trusted my character beyond your circumstances. You stopped asking why, and started saying yes. And I saw that shift. The very heavens leaned in when you decided to stop striving and started abiding. I wasn't asking you to figure it all out. I was asking you to rest in me while everything felt like a question. You passed that test without even realizing it. You surrendered your timeline, your desires, your outcomes, your emotions, not because you were out of options, but because you finally saw that my way would always be higher. Do you know how rare that is? To be surrounded by chaos and still hand me the pen. You allowed me to write the next line even when the previous one hadn't ended well. That trust moves mountains. I saw you weep and say, "Lord, if this is your will, I'll stay." That sentence was more powerful than 1,000 prayers of demand. You gave me what you could have clung to, and that unlocked a realm of intervention you didn't even know was waiting. You didn't just surrender circumstances, you surrendered control over how the healing should happen, how the restoration should look, how the justice should come. You gave me permission to surprise you. And now I will. Because that release was not weakness. It was wisdom. That act of handing me what was too heavy marked a new chapter of divine rearrangement. I'm shifting the pieces now, not according to your plan, but mine. And that plan was always greater. You trusted my voice above your understanding, and that's why breakthrough is now unavoidable. I never needed you to control the storm. I only asked that you stay anchored to me in it. You obeyed, even when your emotions begged you to do otherwise. You didn't demand signs. You leaned into silence and found me there. My child, your release was a roar in the spirit. It tore down walls. It redirected entire timelines. It repositioned blessings that had been waiting for your surrender. You didn't lose by letting go. You won. Because I can only fill what's been emptied of self. You created space by your obedience, and now I'm about to fill it with a kind of restoration that cannot be earned, only receive. You made room for my will, and now my will is making room for you. I honor that choice, and this is only the beginning. There was a moment, so small, so quiet, where you moved forward with nothing but a whisper of my promise and the weight of uncertainty pressing on your shoulders. That step you took may have felt ordinary, but it triggered a chain of supernatural movement in realms you couldn't see. What looked like a small decision to you was a divine signal to me. That step wasn't random. It wasn't forced. It wasn't right. It was a fruit of your obedience, a movement birthed not from convenience but from conviction. You didn't know what would meet you on the other side, but you moved anyway. And when your foot met that unseen path, I dispatched angels to unlock what had been waiting for your courage. There were doors no man could break open, doors time had concealed, doors you didn't even know to ask for, and I placed them in alignment with your movement. Not because you had it all figured out, not because you felt confident, but because you believe in me more than your fears. A single step interrupted delay. That single step activated timing. That single step shook the very chains that generations before you had left untouched. You didn't just walk for yourself. You walked for those who will follow the trail of your surrender. I had already prepared the way, but I waited for your foot to land before I revealed it. That's how I work, child. I don't unveil the full staircase. I honor those who trust me enough to move when all they see is one step. And you did. You didn't wait until the path was painless. You walked while shaking, while doubting yourself, while hearing voices that told you to turn back, but you did. You pressed forward when logic said pause. You advanced when it would have been easier to retreat. And that simple act proved that your faith wasn't built on outcomes but on me. Because of that, I'm opening access. Because of that, I'm accelerating things. Because of that, I'm releasing blueprints you didn't even know were written with your name. I've been waiting for this moment. The moment where your action caught up to your belief. And now, things that were sealed will begin to unfold. Don't be surprised when favor shows up in strange places. Don't be shocked when connections appear that you never pursued. Don't doubt when provision comes without explanation. That one act, that one moment you moved, sent a signal louder than a shout. You didn't announce it. You didn't broadcast it. You just did it. And I saw how hard it was. I saw what you had to silence in your mind just to make that decision. I saw what it cost you, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, and that is why I will not allow that step to return void. I'm honoring it now. I'm building on it now. I'm increasing from it now. You may not even realize it yet, but you stepped into alignment with something that had been waiting to find you. And that single movement, quiet, uncelebrated, yet completely drenched in faith, was the key I was waiting for. Now the lock turns. Now the hidden opens. Now the way clears. And it all began because you dared to move when everything in you wanted to stand still. That's why I'm proud. That's why I'm moving swiftly. That's why I'm not done yet. Because your journey didn't start with a sprint. It started with that one step. And that was all I needed, that sacrifice you made. The one that broke your heart in silence. The one no one fully understood. It reached me. It echoed through the heavens like a song of surrender, louder than 1,000 praises sung without cost. I saw how tightly you held it. I saw how long you prayed to keep it. And yet, when I whispered that it was time to release it, you obeyed. Not because you stopped loving it, but because you loved me more. That kind of surrender cannot be faked. That kind of obedience comes from a place so deep, so intimate, that only I can truly measure it. You didn't walk away easily. You didn't abandon recklessly. You weighed the cost, you wrestled in the quiet, and then you opened your hands while your heart still ached. And that moment became a holy altar. You gave up what made you feel secure. You loosened your grip on what felt familiar. You entrusted me with what you would have preferred to keep. You didn't do it to impress me. You did it because you trust me. Even while tears streamed down your face, you chose to say, "Yes, Lord, I'll follow." That decision shattered barriers you didn't even realize were holding you back. I know how painful it was to lay it down, whether it was a person, a dream, a plan, or a place. I watched your soul grieve and still move forward. It's what separates the called from the chosen, the willingness to let go when I say so. Not when it's easy, not when it makes sense, but when it's necessary for what's next. And now, child, because you obeyed me at that level, I am entrusting you with something more precious. You didn't know what would come after. You had no map, only my voice. But you followed anyway. You kept walking, even when the silence after surrender tried to haunt you. You stayed faithful, even when the void left behind whispered doubts. I never missed a second of it. I was close to you in the letting go. I caught every piece of what broke in your hands. You didn't lose by obeying me. You made room. And that space, though it feels empty now, is about to overflow with purpose. I'm not just returning what you laid down. I'm replacing it with something eternal. What I'm bringing won't require striving to keep. It won't drain you to hold. It won't compete with your devotion. It will flow with what I've already prepared you for. A thing you released. It was good for a season, but it would have limited the next level I have ordained for you. So I asked you to release it, not as a punishment, but as a setup. You didn't realize it then, but you were handing me one chapter so I could turn the page. You were laying down what was temporary for something that carries eternal weight. You sacrificed what was seen for what is now being formed in the unseen. And soon, You'll understand why I required it. Soon, the emptiness will be filled with clarity. Soon, the pain will give way to joy. You didn't fail by letting go. You proved that I'm your treasure. And that kind of heart cannot be ignored. I honor what you left behind. I bless what you gave up. And I will multiply what you offered me. Because where others hoard what they love, you chose to offer it back into my hands. And now, those hands are opening wide to pour into you what no eye has seen. Stay near, because what comes next will make every tear worth it. What you released that day wasn't just a wound. It was a weapon the enemy tried to use against your soul. I saw the fire in your chest, the sting in your spirit, the ache that came from betrayal, disrespect, abandonment, or unfairness. And still, you made the choice that few make. You let it go. Not because it didn't matter. Not because it didn't hurt. But because you refused to let pain become your identity. And choice was a miracle. Yes, child, forgiveness is not weakness. It's warfare. The moment you refused to rehearse what they did, the moment you stopped feeding the bitterness that demanded to grow inside you, was the moment you declared freedom over your future. You walked away from vengeance not because you were passive, but because you were powerful enough to trust me with justice. You had every reason to keep score, every right to make them pay, but instead you came to me and said, I don't want to carry this anymore. That prayer broke chains. That prayer silenced the accuser who tried to drag your destiny through cycles of resentment. You didn't forgive because they deserved it. You forgave because I asked you to trust me with it. And that trust changed things. You may not see it yet, but forgiveness shifted the atmosphere around you. I was already working when you whispered, Lord, I release them. You didn't just clean your heart. You cleared your path. Because you couldn't walk into what I've promised while dragging the weight of that offense. I know how much it cost you. I know how often your mind tried to go back and replay the moments that made you bleed. But each time you turned your thoughts toward me. And I noticed. I honored it. You chose freedom over being right. You chose healing over holding on. You chose me over your pain. That choice has made space for restoration to begin. Not just in you, but in the generations connected to your obedience. You broke patterns. You interrupted cycles. You changed a story. What would have grown into bitterness, you uprooted with one word. Yes. Your yes to me, even through tears, allowed me to begin restoring what was stolen by offense. I know they never apologized. I know some still think they were right. But this was never about them. It was about what I wanted to do in you. That surrender to mercy is the very reason I'm releasing new clarity, new peace, new doors. You laid down the offense, and now I'm laying foundations. Watch how I begin to build on your obedience. Watch how I begin to pour fresh oil over your dry places. You see, forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's remembering that I am your defender. And you trusted me enough to take your hands off the sword. You didn't let the poison spread. You didn't let your heart harden. That is holy. That is strength. That is what I celebrate in you today. My child, you passed a test that many fail. And now, I can entrust you with more, because your heart is clean, and I can fill it freely. What's ahead will not be built on bitterness. It will be built on the purity of your surrender. And because you released them, I'm releasing you. Into joy, into justice, into wholeness, into the next part of this journey that will carry the fragrance of peace and the weight of glory. There were moments when injustice knocked at your door, when you were misunderstood, misquoted, mistreated, and everything inside you screamed to defend, to explain, to retaliate. What you didn't. You stood in the tension, swallowed the pride, and chose a holy silence. That silence wasn't weakness. It wasn't retreat. It was a roar of wisdom. It was the sound of a spirit ruled by me, not by emotion. When they accused you, you didn't strike back. When they twisted your intentions, you didn't match their tone. When they tried to provoke your flesh, you let my spirit speak louder. even if it said nothing at all. I saw that restrained. I saw the way you clenched your jaw, held your tears, folded your hands instead of pointing fingers. That kind of discipline doesn't come from willpower, it comes from surrender. You laid your right to respond on the altar, and instead of reacting, you released it into my hands. I know how much you wanted to speak. I know how many words formed in your heart but never made it to your lips. I know how lonely it felt to stay quiet while others got to be loud. But child, I tell you the truth. Your silence was not empty. It was sacred. You trusted that I am your witness, and you gave me space to move. While others built arguments, you built altars. While they raised their voices, you bowed your spirit. That is what pleases me. That is what separates those who walk in flesh from those who walk with me. And because you did not let fury guide your next move, I'm now preparing to answer on your behalf. You see, I'm not blind to what happened. I saw the slander. I watched the deception. I heard the laughter when they thought they'd silenced you. But heaven wasn't silent. I was recording. I was measuring. I was preparing justice while you were choosing peace. You didn't need to fight for yourself, because you trusted that I go before you. And now, I will. The tables are turning, not because you force them, but because you refuse to flip them. That's where true strength lies, in self-control fueled by faith, in peace that passes understanding. You could have proved your point, but instead, you proved your posture. You could have taken the bait, but instead, you stayed at my feet. And in doing so, you demonstrated that my character lives in you. So don't regret your silence. Don't wonder if you should have said more. What you did say has made room for me to speak louder than anything your words could have accomplished. I am not slow to act. I am precise. I am just. And I honor restraint that is birthed from trust. I'm about to answer with clarity. I'm about to confirm what you chose not to defend. The people who misunderstood you will witness my validation. The ones who misjudged your quietness will be shocked by how I now elevate your voice. You stayed still, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. And that's the kind of spirit I raise up. So stand firm. The blessing that's coming will not carry the noise of revenge. It will carry the sound of restoration. What you held back then, I'm now releasing in abundance. Because you didn't let anger write your next chapter, I'm now writing one that even your enemies will have to read. This is how I honor the meek, not by making them louder, but by making them undeniable. That moment, when chaos surrounded you, when uncertainty pressed in from every side, when solutions were nowhere in sight, you had every reason to fall apart. You had every reason to let panic grip you, to let your thoughts spiral into worry, to let fear dictate your decisions. What you didn't. You dropped to your knees when you could have run in circles. You lifted your eyes to me when everything else was pulling you down. You opened your mouth in prayer instead of complaint, and that silence-breaking cry reached me faster than lightning. Your voice, trembling yet full of trust, rang through the heavens. And while the world would have told you to move, to act, to hustle, you chose instead to pause and call on me. That stillness wasn't weakness. It was divine strength clothed in humility. It was the heart posture I look for when I release power. You didn't beg out of fear, you communed out of faith. You weren't pleading for escape. You were aligning your heart with mine. And that choice redirected everything. I saw the tension in your body, the racing thoughts you wrestled to bring into stillness. I saw how much pressure you were under, how time felt like it was slipping, how expectations and fears were screaming louder than peace. And even in that battle, you pushed through and prayed. You didn't wait until it felt easy. You didn't wait until everything was quiet. You sought me in the storm, in the noise, in the pressure, and because you did, I leaned closer. That moment of prayer wasn't small. It was sacred. It was a declaration that you would not be ruled by the temporary, that you would not be moved by fear's voice, that you believed I was who I said I am. You could have panicked and taken it all into your own hands. You could have made a rash decision. You could have defaulted to anxiety, to worry, to doubt. But instead, you invited me into the moment. And that changed everything. You shifted the atmosphere with your faith. You didn't just hold back the panic. You replaced it with purpose. You activated my response, not by shouting but by trusting. And now I'm responding, not with delay but with strategy. You will see the result of that prayer, even if the answer doesn't arrive how you imagined. You made room for my way by refusing to be ruled by yours. That's what brings me joy. When my children don't wait for peace to show up, but carry it into the chaos. Your calm wasn't natural, it was supernatural. It came from a place that panic cannot touch. And that's what makes you different. You're learning to live by my spirit, not by your surroundings. You're learning that prayer isn't a last resort. It's your first defense. And because of that, you're walking into something greater. You'll look back on this moment, the one where everything could have unraveled, and you'll remember how you prayed instead. That prayer will be the anchor in your testimony. That whispered surrender, that quiet plea, that firm refusal to panic, it were the key. And now, because you chose me over madness, I'm placing keys in your hands. Doors you didn't even knock on are being unlocked. Resources are being redirected. Answers are being released. You didn't collapse. You commune. And that communion shook the heavens more than any frantic cry ever could. You're growing, child. This is maturity. This is power. This is my delight in you. You didn't wait for control. You gave me control. And now I'm moving, because that prayer was the turning point. It wasn't fair. And I know that. You were carrying wounds that hadn't yet healed, pain that still pulsed beneath the surface. And yet you reached out and helped anyway. You chose compassion while you were still battling your own storms. You showed up for others while your heart was silently screaming for someone to show up for you. And I took notice. I counted every time you pushed past your weariness just to offer hope. You didn't wait until you were whole. You gave from the middle of your mess, and that, my child, is a fragrance sweeter than any offering laid on gold altars. You gave your strength while yours was fading. You poured out joy while your spirit was trembling. You encouraged when you felt forgotten. You covered others in prayer while your own needs were buried beneath silence. That's what makes you so rare. Not that you were unshaken, but that you refused to let your pain poison your purpose. I saw you minister while mourning. I saw you love through loss. I saw you lend peace even when yours was cracking. And those moments, hidden, raw, holy, are now being honored in ways no human hand can orchestrate. You didn't wait for applause to do the right thing. You didn't need a full heart to choose love. You didn't make excuses. You made sacrifices. You didn't say, "Not now, I'm hurting." Instead, you whispered, "Even so, I'll serve." And in doing that, you became an echo of me. Because I too gave while bleeding. I too loved while being pierced. I, too, offered healing while being rejected. You were never more like me than when you gave out of your brokenness, trusting me to be the one who would pour back into you later. And I will. I am. The restoration coming to your life isn't just about healing. It's about recognition. It's about recompense for what you gave when you had every reason to withdraw. You didn't perform for attention. You didn't serve for a platform. You did it because it was in your nature to love even when your soul was trembling. And now I will refill what was emptied. I will restore what was drained. I will return what was forgotten. Your kindness did not vanish into the void. It ascended into my courts. Your resilience was not missed by heaven. You planted mercy while walking through fire, and now you will reap a harvest of miracles. I know it cost you. I know how your own heart questioned, "When will someone pour into me like this?" I know how you quietly longed for the same love you gave so freely. And now I say this to you. I have prepared people who will love you with the same selflessness you modeled. I have prepared spaces where you won't always have to be the strongest person in the room. I have prepared moments where you will receive without needing to be needed. But more than that, I am healing the parts of you that serve silently. I am pouring oil into the places that never cried out loud but bled faithfully. I am proud of the way you didn't make your wounds the center of your identity. You let your scars testify instead of scream. And now, the honor is coming. The elevation is near. And not because you demanded it, but because you didn't. Because you kept being a blessing while bleeding, I will now bless you in ways that go beyond explanation. You didn't stop, and neither will I. That season tested everything: your patience, your endurance, your belief that I was still near. The waiting stretched longer than you imagined, and the silence tried to convince you that nothing was moving. But in the middle of the ache, you lifted your voice. Not because everything made sense, not because the answer had arrived, but because you decided that my worth wasn't based on how fast I fulfilled your request. That kind of worship is rare. You praised me while the door remained shut. You worshiped while the miracle lingered. You gave thanks while nothing visibly shifted. And I want you to know, child, that shook the unseen realm. While others measure my goodness by outcomes, you chose to glorify me by faith alone. And that pleased me deeply. I watched you lift your hands while your heart was breaking. I heard your hallelujah through the cracking in your voice. I saw you show up for me when your soul felt dry, when your hope was fading, when your dreams seemed postponed without reason. Yet you never let the delay steal the devotion. That's when I knew your love for me wasn't transactional. You weren't singing for rewards. You weren't praising for results. You were loving me for who I am, not for what I give, and that makes heaven rejoice. You didn't fold your worship when things grew hard. You didn't shut your mouth just because your circumstances stayed still. You kept praising, and every time you did, you pushed back against the lies trying to convince you I had forgotten. You refused to become bitter in the waiting room. You refused to compare your timeline with theirs. You refused to let unanswered prayers become unanswered praise. My child, that kind of faith changes things. You weren't being denied. You were being refined. I was never withholding out of punishment. I was preparing you for something greater. And your praise, raw, real, resistant, became the very key that kept you aligned while I was orchestrating what you couldn't yet see. You didn't know this, but every time you sang through the silence, angels were dispatched to war on your behalf. Every time you smiled through the stretching, I sent strength to cover you. Every time you worshipped without feeling it, you were being built into someone unshakable. That's why you're still standing. That's why your spirit is stronger now. That's why what's coming can't be shaken. Because your praise wasn't rooted in convenience. It was rooted in covenant. And now, the heavens have recorded every moment you praised me while waiting for answers. I've captured every time you said, even now, Lord, you are good, though your eyes longed for breakthrough. Your patience did not go unnoticed. Your posture did not go unrewarded. I'm releasing what's been held back, not because you demanded, but because you trusted. Not because you shouted, but because you stayed. The delay wasn't denial, it was development. And now, your season is shifting. But even more beautiful than that, you've changed. You've become someone who doesn't need immediate evidence to believe I'm working. You've matured into a soul that anchors in who I am, not what I do. And that's why the blessing coming won't be ordinary. It will be temporary. It won't be fragile. It will be built upon the foundation of steadfast faith, the kind that grows in darkness, the kind that praises in pain, the kind that I can build legacies on. Get ready, child. The blessing may have delayed, but now it arrives dressed in multiplied glory. And it's coming to the one who chose to praise me anyway. I remember the moment you said yes. Not the loud one with emotion, but the deep one that no one heard, the one forged in a place of wrestling and surrender. That yes wasn't casual. It wasn't convenient. It didn't come from excitement. It came from a fire that had to choose me when everything else called louder. You were tired. You were unsure. You were facing resistance. But still, you yielded. That surrender broke through more than you know. It pierced through realms of resistance that had been standing in the way of my plans for generations. Your yes didn't echo in empty air. It cracked the walls that pride had built, shattered lies that had lingered for years, and sent a clear signal to heaven that you were ready, not because everything made sense, but because you trusted me beyond your questions. That kind of yes isn't ordinary. That yes is what angels respond to. That yes is what demons fear. It wasn't soft. It was spiritual warfare. It wasn't fragile. It was forged in pressure. You didn't just say yes with your words, you said it with your actions, your decisions, your silence, your obedience, your perseverance. You made it clear that you belonged to me no matter what it cost you. And that yes became a door through which I now begin to release the next phase of your purpose. That yes drew a line in the sand, and the enemy knew it. That yes marked the moment where compromise lost its grip, where confusion lost its voice, where hesitation had to surrender to trust. You didn't just say yes once. You've kept saying it again and again, in the dark, in the waiting, in the pain, in the pull of pressure. And that is why I'm proud of you. I'm not looking for perfect words, I'm looking for willing hearts. You gave me yours. That yes, quiet but consistent, became a weapon that unlocked authority. You don't realize how much power is now resting on your spirit because of that one moment of full surrender. You may feel ordinary, but that yes made you dangerous to darkness. That yes told hell it could no longer manipulate your loyalty. That yes signaled that even if the journey gets harder, your commitment won't bend. I've recorded every time you renewed it in secret. When no one clapped, when no one understood, when even you didn't know how long you could keep holding on. But you did. And I have been preparing acceleration not because of your ability, but because of your availability. Your yes has authorized alignment. Your yes has torn down cycles. Your yes has silenced the voice that told you it was too late. I don't need many. I need the surrendered. And that is who you've become. You don't see it yet, but your yes is now echoing into rooms you haven't entered. It's making space for divine favor. It's making way for heavenly assignments. Your yes was not the end. It was the opening. And now, I'm going to pour into what you gave me permission to touch. Because you didn't hold back, I won't either. Because you said yes to me before the blessings showed up, now the blessings will chase you before you even ask. Your yes made room for my hand to move without limit. So get ready. What's coming won't feel forced. It will feel familiar. Because it's what I planned all along. I just needed your yes to release it. I watched you walk away from the easy path, not because it wasn't tempting, not because you weren't tired, but because your heart had already been anchored in something greater. You turned from applause when your spirit discerned it was not sent by me. You chose to remain steady in the quiet instead of chasing the noise that promised visibility but lacked my presence. That was no small decision. That cost you opportunities, friendships, and familiar routines. But it protected your anointing. You laid down what the world would call gain so you could keep what only heaven can give: alignment. And I took note of it. I saw you decline invitations that would have elevated your name but compromised your intimacy with me. I saw you close doors you could have forced open, simply because I whispered, "Not that one." Your refusal to build your life on popularity made room for me to build your future on purpose. I saw the struggle it brought, how others misunderstood your silence, how your consistency was mistaken for insignificance. They didn't know you weren't being passive. You were being preserved. You were guarding something sacred, your yes to my will. And that yes wasn't a one-time thing. You kept renewing it every time comfort came knocking with counterfeit promises. Every time recognition offered a shortcut to influence. Every time the craving to be seen tried to compete with the call to stay hidden. You didn't bow. You didn't bend. You stood. And not on a stage, not in a spotlight, but in a posture of surrender that made heaven proud. You didn't seek approval from men because you had already heard approval from me. You trusted that being in my will, even in obscurity, would always lead to something far more eternal than anything offered by temporary platforms. That trust unlocked things you haven't even discovered yet. The places where others compromised are the very places where I'm building something lasting in you. You said no when it was easier to say yes. You let go when holding on would have made you feel secure. And that's why I'm surrounding you now with what can't be shaken. Because you didn't build on sand, you built on surrender. Your sacrifice wasn't in vain. It planted seeds that will soon grow into divine reward. You may not be celebrated by the crowds, but you are honored in the courts of heaven. And what I'm releasing now cannot be earned by charm or talent or connections. It comes only to those who have remained faithful to me when no one else was watching. You didn't trade truth for attention. You didn't alter your obedience for applause. You didn't lower your standards to keep people close. And because of that, I'm raising you in ways that don't require striving. You won't have to prove yourself in this next season. Your obedience will speak louder than any introduction. Your purity of heart will open doors that hustle never could. The ones who overlooked you will wonder how favor found you. But I will know it was because you remained, because you endured, because you stayed planted when it would have been easier to perform. You didn't just sacrifice comfort, you crucified the craving to be worshipped. You didn't just surrender approval, you silenced the idol of applause. And in doing so, you made room for me to take the rightful place on the throne of your heart. And now I'm filling this space with a peace that doesn't fade, a joy that doesn't depend on status, and a purpose that doesn't require permission. My child, because you refused to be lured away from my voice, I'm about to speak into places that have been waiting for your arrival. It wasn't what you gave that caught my eye. It was how you gave. Not from overflow, but from obedience. You didn't wait until you had abundance to be a blessing. You released what little you had because you trusted that I am your source, not your savings. You didn't calculate your gift based on how much you could spare. You gave based on what I whispered to your spirit, and that changed everything. I saw how you counted the cost privately, how you looked at your limited resources and still chose to release your portion. You didn't know it then, but that act reverberated through eternity. While others were giving from excess, you gave from faith, and that is a currency I always respond to. You gave when no one asked. You sowed when no one expected. You did it not for attention but from conviction. I saw you let go of what felt essential, not to be noticed, but to be obedient. That is rare. That is holy. That is the kind of sacrifice that heaven records. You didn't wait for conditions to be perfect. You didn't wait for your own needs to be fully met. You released your portion, even when it meant going without, even when it meant tightening your belt, even when it felt like the timing made no sense. And that's what moved me. Because what you gave wasn't just an offering, it was worship. It was trust made visible. It was a declaration that you believe I'm not just enough, I'm more than enough. That's the kind of faith I honor. Not the kind that waits until it's safe, but the kind that gives when it stretches. And stretch it did. I saw you sacrifice for others when your own supply was thin. I saw you bless someone's need when yours hadn't yet been filled. You didn't announce it. You didn't record it. You didn't look around to see who was watching. But I was. And now I say to you, that moment was a turning point. You opened a window in the spirit when you opened your hand in the natural. You activated multiplication when you let go of self-preservation. You built a bridge for blessings to find you, and now they're coming, not because you earned them, but because you trusted me enough to make room for them. I don't overlook these things. Heaven doesn't miss radical generosity. What you thought was small was actually massive in my eyes. You planted in famine, and you will reap in overflow. You watered someone else's field, and now I'm sending rain to yours. And I want you to know that seed didn't just bless the person you gave it to. It unlocked breakthrough for your entire household. The ripple effect of your obedience has reached places you may never step into, but your spirit already did. That's how powerful obedience is when it's done from a heart of surrender. You could have held back. You could have said, "I'll give later." But you chose now. You chose release. You chose faith. And I choose to reward that. So watch what I do next. Provision will show up in unexpected places. Answers will arrive from corners you never looked in. Doors will swing open without effort. Not because you demanded anything, but because you dared to believe that I would never let a giver go empty-handed. And I won't. My word stands. I will pour out blessings, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. On someday. Now. Because when you gave out of your little, you showed me that your trust is not conditional. And now I'm responding, not just with supply, but with an overflow you never imagined. There were moments when you could have chosen to skip it. The prayer behind closed doors, the quiet thankfulness, the silent decision to stay upright in your heart, and no one on this earth would have known. No one was watching. No one was taking notes. No spotlight, no affirmation, no applause. But still, you bowed your heart. Still, you whispered my name. Still, you acknowledged me when you could have let the moment pass. That, child, with the kind of honor that makes the heavens lean in. Because true reverence is revealed in the places where no eyes are on you. Holiness isn't proven in crowds. It's proven in shadows. And I saw you there. I watched the way you resisted shortcuts, not to be praised, but because you knew I was watching. I heard your spirit say, "I won't compromise, even if no one ever finds out." That's integrity. That's what I build on. I watched you give up small dishonest gains just because you didn't want to grieve my spirit. I saw how you corrected your thoughts before they turned into actions, not because someone would catch you, but because you wanted to be clean before me. That kind of heart cannot be taught. It can only be refined through surrender. And you walked that road with me. I remember when you made time for me even when your schedule was packed. I saw how you sat with my word when your flesh wanted distractions. I watched how you turned down opportunities that could have made you seen, simply because you sensed my hand wasn't on them. That's what sets you apart. You didn't honor me for attention. You didn't obey me for rewards. You did it because you value my presence over everything. That posture is sacred. That's where purity lies. When others adjusted their convictions for convenience, you held yours tighter. Not to be perfect, but to stay close. And now I tell you this. What you did in private, I will now reward in public. The honor you gave me in the secret place has built a foundation under your feet. I can trust you with more, not because you chase increase, but because you protect intimacy. That's what I look for. That's what I raise up. You didn't need an audience to be faithful. You didn't wait for pressure to become consistent. You built consistency in the quiet. You nurtured devotion when there was no return on it. And that is why what I'm building with you will not collapse. It's not built on hype or image, it's built on real, raw obedience. You didn't cut corners. You didn't inflate your identity. You simply walked with me, one silent yes at a time. And that is why your next season will be marked with unmistakable favor. I can elevate you without losing you. I can promote you without you becoming prideful. Because your roots are deep. Because your motives have been sifted. Because your loyalty isn't conditional. You've made me your priority without needing others to notice. And now, I will cause others to notice without you even asking. Not to inflate you, but to position you. Because someone who honors me in secret will always carry my glory in the open. You carry something pure. You've preserved something holy. And I will protect it as I expand it. You've passed the hidden test. The one where nothing seems to count but everything actually does. And now it counts. Now it comes. Now the doors begin to open, not because you demanded them, but because you proved I was enough when no one else was looking. There was a moment, more than once, when temptation didn't whisper quietly from a distance, but roared up close, clawing for your focus, begging for your compromise, insisting that no one would know if you gave in. The pull was real. The battle in your mind was relentless. The suggestion came wrapped in false comfort and disguised itself as harmless, as normal, as something you deserve after all you'd endured. And yet you resisted. You didn't just walk away from sin, you walked toward me. You didn't entertain the poison just because it was packaged beautifully. You didn't flirt with compromise just because it would have been easy to hide. You saw what it was, an assassin masked as pleasure. And instead of indulging, you ran to the shelter of my presence. That choice wasn't loud, but it was powerful. That no you gave to darkness echoed louder than 1,000 public declarations of faith. You didn't announce your discipline to the world. You simply chose holiness when it was costly. And that moved me. You protected what was sacred. You guarded your thoughts like a warrior. You shut doors that your flesh wanted to crack open. And that, child, made all of heaven rise to its feet. I saw how the temptation didn't just knock once. It returned. Again and again, trying to wear you down. Trying to convince you that everyone stumbles, that a little compromise wouldn't ruin anything. But you knew better. Not because you're flawless, but because you're surrendered. You valued your peace more than a moment's pleasure. You saw that what you feed grows, and you refused to let lust, envy, bitterness, or pride take root in your spirit. And even in moments when your thoughts tried to wander, you pulled them back under my authority. That self-discipline wasn't just for your benefit. It was for the protection of your future, your calling, your legacy. You don't realize how much you preserved by saying no. You shielded promises not yet birthed. You kept the oil pure that I'm about to pour out. You didn't just guard yourself. You guarded generations to come. Because when you chose purity, you broke chains of dysfunction. When you chose to look away, walk away, turn the page, close the browser, cancel the message, deny the urge, you wrote history in the spirit. You rewrote patterns. You rejected old cycles. You tore down altars built to the flesh and rebuilt a place where my spirit could dwell freely. That's why what I'm building in your life won't collapse. You've laid down a foundation that lust can't contaminate. You've built on discipline that envy can't erode. You've planted seeds in purity that manipulation can't uproot. And now I say to you, because you resisted in the dark, I'm bringing honor in the light. Because you remained faithful in thought, I'm elevating you in purpose. Because you didn't take what looked good, I'm about to give you what is divinely ordained. You trusted that I am better than whatever momentary thrill the enemy tried to throw your way. And you were right. You've proven that you want me more than you want relief. You've shown that you're ready to carry glory, not just gifts. The world celebrates indulgence, but I reward integrity. And your integrity in this area has become a key. I'm placing things in your hand now that others tried to unlock through talent, but you've unlocked through character. What you denied has become the gate to what I'm about to release. This next outpouring isn't just about what I give you, it's about what I can now trust you to carry. And I can trust you, because you chose purity not out of pressure, but out of love. They spoke about you with twisted words and heavy assumptions, cutting into your character with knives wrapped in conversation. You heard the rumors. You felt the sting. You tasted the injustice in silence. Yet still, you didn't retaliate. You didn't open your mouth to return the damage. You didn't throw names into the fire to protect your own. Instead, you stayed still. You stayed clean. You kept others safe, even when no one offered you the same shield. And I saw it all. I watched how you refused to drag someone's name through the mud, even though they were using yours like a welcome mat. You had every reason to correct the narrative. You had facts. You had receipts. You had evidence. But instead, you gave me the space to defend you. That surrender in the heat of accusation didn't go unnoticed. When you chose to protect instead of expose, to bless instead of curse, to walk away instead of wound, you became a living reflection of my nature. I too was falsely accused. I, too, was misrepresented. And just as I stood silent before those who judged me unfairly, you stood in a similar stillness. And child, that silence was not weakness. It was strength cloaked in mercy. It was wisdom roaring louder than defense. You honored me not by what you said, but by what you refused to say. You didn't try to destroy reputations to preserve your image. You didn't play the game of retaliation. You chose the road of righteousness, even when it cost you your comfort, your relationships, your reputation. And I honor that deeply. The world teaches revenge, but you chose restraint. The flesh demands payback, but you chose peace. You didn't need to expose their flaws to prove your innocence. You trusted that I, the righteous judge, would reveal truth in my time. And now, I will. I'm bringing clarity to confusion. I'm bringing vindication without you having to lift a finger. I'm restoring what was tainted, and I'm promoting what was silenced. Because you didn't take matters into your own hands, I'm about to put matters into mine. Watch as I begin to speak through situations that were left unanswered. Watch how I realign connections you thought were lost forever. Watch how I elevate your voice in the very places where it was once drowned out by lies. But more than that, I'm rewarding the purity of your heart. You never wanted to see them fall. You weren't praying for their destruction. You weren't waiting for karma. You were just hurting, and still, you didn't inflict pain in return. That's what makes you trustworthy. That's what makes you different. That's what makes you mine. Your loyalty to love, even while being pierced, is the fragrance of my spirit. And now, that fragrance is rising. I'm bringing beauty from the ashes of every moment you swallowed offense and released it to me. I'm bringing restoration for the seasons where your name was passed through careless hands. You didn't fight dirty. You didn't dig graves with gossip. You didn't weaponize truth to wound. And because of that, I'm writing your story with a weight that cannot be erased. You will not have to clear your name. I will do it myself. You will not have to prove your worth. I've already sealed it. I've seen how you carried the weight of false perception with grace. And now, I'm exchanging that weight for a favor. I'm placing justice where there was once judgment. I'm preparing a table not in a hidden place, but in front of those who misunderstood your silence as weakness. This isn't revenge. It's recognition. This isn't payback. It's divine positioning. Because you didn't tear others down to lift yourself up, I'm lifting you in a way no lie can block. You didn't wait for an audience to start giving. You didn't need your name on a banner to start showing up. You served because love moved you, not attention. While others chased platforms, you chased purpose. While many waited for their moment to be noticed, you made every unnoticed moment your ministry. I watched the way you labored behind the scenes. No cameras, no recognition, no spotlight, only you, your heart, and your willingness to pour out anyway. You wiped tears no one acknowledged. You met needs that were never spoken aloud. You showed up early and stayed late. You did the work others avoided. And not once did you ask, "What do I get for this?" Instead, you whispered, "Is this pleasing to you, Lord?" And that, child, is what drew my eyes closer. Because I'm not looking for performance. I'm looking for those who love without limits. You didn't serve for promotion. You didn't move for applause. You didn't measure your effort by who was watching. You measured it by who you were becoming. And every single act, every dish you cleaned, every chair you set up, every prayer you whispered on someone else's behalf, every time you gave up your convenience to make someone else's day lighter, I recorded it. Not one seed was wasted. Not one sacrifice was overlooked. My angels took note every time you decided to love in a way that would never be reposted. You didn't realize it, but your hidden service was shaking things in the spirit. You were building walls of legacy while others were building towers of vanity. And now, I am laying the reward at your feet. Not because you demanded it, but because I delight to honor those who do things my way. The reward that's coming is not a payment, it's an inheritance. You didn't earn this like wages. You unlocked it like family. You chose the path few walk, to be faithful when no one was clapping, to be diligent when no one said thank you. And now I will give you what no man could give. I will open doors that no human hands could have built. I will raise you in rooms where others only entered through pride, but you will enter through purity. You proved that your service wasn't for show, it was from surrender. And I can multiply that kind of heart. The kingdom is built by those like you. The unseen warriors, the quiet helpers, the ones who don't need a stage to change a soul. And the influence I am giving you now is not rooted in performance. It's rooted in presence. Because when you served the least, you were serving me. When you lifted the burden of another, you were worshiping me. And I never forgot it. They might not remember what you did for them. They might have never said thank you. But I wrote it down. And what I record, I respond to. You were willing to be invisible. And now, I'm about to make my glory visible through you. You were content to stay low. And now, I'm exalting you without striving. You washed the feet of others. And now, I'm setting you in places of divine authority. Not because you chased it, but because you didn't. Your unseen service became the seed of my supernatural favor. And now, it's time for the harvest. Get ready, beloved. What's been hidden is about to be highlighted. Not by man, but by me. It would have been easier to follow the crowd, to blend in with the noise, to silence your convictions for the sake of comfort or approval. But you didn't. When others bowed to compromise, you remained upright in quiet defiance, not out of pride, but out of unwavering devotion to what is holy. I watched you walk into rooms where values were distorted, where truth was mocked, and still, you didn't flinch. You didn't dilute your beliefs to make others feel comfortable. You didn't trade holiness for popularity. You stayed rooted in me, even when isolation wrapped around you like a heavy garment. That kind of courage doesn't come from emotion, it comes from deep communion. You didn't choose righteousness to be seen, you chose it because you knew I was watching. You chose it because you would rather be faithful in obscurity than celebrated in compromise. And I want you to hear this clearly, that kind of loyalty moves heaven. It strengthens the unseen foundation beneath your feet. It speaks louder in silence than empty shouts ever could. You didn't need a crowd to validate your stand. You needed me. And you knew I was enough. I remember when the invitation to lower your standard came subtly, wrapped in small justifications. And I saw how your spirit stirred, how your conscience remained tender, how you chose to disappoint man rather than disappoint me. You felt the weight of being misunderstood. You felt the sting of being left out. You felt the eyes that rolled when your boundary stood firm. But you didn't move. You didn't apologize for your reverence. You didn't adjust your conviction just to be accepted. And that, child, is rare. While many chase what is easy, you clung to what is eternal. You chose the narrow road not because it was attractive, but because you knew it was the only one that leads to life. You held to purity in a world addicted to compromise. You pursued peace without participating in pollution. You didn't mock what was sacred. You didn't laugh at sin to fit in. Instead, you carried my light into places that tried to dim it. And now, because you have proven your devotion in the furnace of rejection, I will honor you in the presence of those who once dismissed you. I will raise you in places where others tried to keep you small. I will use your life as a testimony, not of perfection, but of perseverance. You didn't pretend to be perfect. You just refused to abandon your pursuit of me. And that consistency, that refusal to be swayed by pressure, is what I now bless. You were not hurt, but you were firm. You were not judgmental, but you were discerning. You did not attack. You simply stood. You didn't need to defend yourself. Your integrity did it for you. And though it cost you in the moment, the loneliness, the mockery, the silence from those who once called you friend, you gained something greater, my approval. And now I'm stepping in to vindicate you. The stand you took will not be forgotten. The lines you drew in private are about to be honored in public. And I want you to know this. You weren't alone. You may have felt abandoned by people, but you were surrounded by angels. You may have lost some relationships, but you gained greater alignment. You may have looked like the minority, but in the spirit, you stood with a host of heaven. And now I'm calling forth a reward that matches the weight of what you carried in silence. You proved that even when no one else agreed, you would still obey. And that obedience has built a foundation I will now expand. They gave you standards that shifted like sand, expectations you were never meant to carry, conditions that contradicted your calling. They praised you when you pleased them and pulled away when you didn't bend. You could have shaped yourself to fit their mold, bowed to the pressure of acceptance, chased the empty crowns of people's praise, but you didn't. You made a quiet decision that your value wouldn't be determined by applause or opinion, but by the gaze of your Father. When the crowd looked confused, you looked up. When they turned their faces from you, you turned yours toward mine. And child, that one posture, eyes lifted not to men but to me, changed everything. Because I never asked you to impress people. I asked you to follow me. I never required your image to be perfect, only your gaze to stay fixed. And you did that. In rooms where you felt unseen, you chose to worship. In conversations where your motives were misunderstood, you stayed grounded. You didn't adjust your purpose to maintain people's comfort. You didn't water down your truth just to be invited again. You stayed aligned with me, even when it cost you status, inclusion, or temporary affirmation. And that kind of focus is rare. I watched as you wrestled with the sting of being overlooked. I saw how your heart longed to be understood, not to be praised, but just to be known. I know how it felt to give your best and still be ignored. I know how the silence after obedience felt heavier than any rejection. But still, you didn't lower your eyes to look for their validation. You lifted them to me. And because you did, I am lifting you now. Your desire for my approval is the reason I'm releasing what others couldn't access. You didn't perform for recognition. You remained for relationship. You chose me over attention. And now I will give you something their claps could never produce. Favor rooted in identity, not image. You're not defined by the number of people who see you. You're defined by the one who formed you. And I see you. I've seen every sacrifice you made when no one was watching. I've seen every act of faithfulness done in secret. I've watched you choose character over charisma, purity over popularity, endurance over ego. And because you weren't looking for their eyes, I'm giving you mine. My eyes are on you for good, not to inspect with judgment, but to watch over you with delight. I'm proud of the way you didn't chase influence. I'm pleased with the way you didn't collapse under the weight of comparison. I'm honoring the way you didn't let people's opinions become your direction. You kept your feet planted. You kept your heart tender. You didn't build your identity on shifting ground. You stood on my word, and now, that word is standing to fulfill itself in your life. Because you lifted your eyes to me, I'm lifting your head. Because you refused to seek man's crown, I'm placing one on your head that cannot be removed. This is not a season of trying to win them over. This is a season where I crown those who didn't compete. You were never in a race with anyone. You stayed in step with me. And now the reward is coming. Not because you outdid anyone, but because you outlasted the need to be seen. You lifted your eyes to the hills, and from there, your help is coming swiftly. I'm your help. I'm your defense. I'm your witness. And I will speak louder than their silence ever did. Because you chose me first, I'm placing you where no man's opinion can remove you. You could have let their sarcasm harden you. You could have returned their coldness with bitterness. You could have raised your voice, sharpened your words, or walked away with resentment in your heart. But instead, you chose mercy. You stayed gentle when provoked. You smiled even when their laughter carried ridicule. You responded with peace while their tone was laced with mockery. You didn't allow offense to plant itself inside you. You didn't let their misunderstanding of your devotion write how you carry your faith. And I saw that. I stood beside you as they rolled their eyes at your worship, as they dismissed your convictions as weakness, as they whispered behind your back like your prayers were foolish. And yet, you didn't stop loving them. That's what moved me. You didn't shift your posture just because they couldn't comprehend your pursuit of me. You didn't shrink back in shame. You didn't water down your truth to avoid their rejection. You didn't become defensive. You didn't retaliate. You stayed rooted in grace. That restraint, that consistent love in the face of ridicule, was louder than any sermon you could have spoken. You weren't looking to win the argument. You were living to reflect me. And you did. I know it's dumb. I know how it felt to be mocked for choosing purity, to be labeled for your hunger for holiness, to be treated like your fire was fanaticism. I know how their words tried to dig into your worth, how their jokes sought to shake your foundation. But you kept shining. You kept blessing. You kept holding the line. That kind of faithfulness doesn't go unnoticed in heaven. It sets you apart. When I walked the earth, they mocked me too. They questioned my devotion, misunderstood my heart, and eventually nailed me for the very love I came to give. You, beloved, were walking in my footsteps when you stood your ground in compassion, not condemnation. When you withheld judgment and chose understanding instead, you mirrored the very spirit that lives inside you. And now I'm preparing to honor you not only in private but in places where your kindness was once laughed at. There are people who misunderstood you who will soon come seeking your wisdom. There are those who once called you extreme who will find refuge in the very light they tried to snuff out. Your response to their rejection has planted seeds in their hearts. They may not know it yet, but your consistency, your unshakable grace, has marked them. And when life breaks their confidence in the world, it will be your example they remember. Your name will rise in their memory not as the one who fought back, but the one who loved anyway. You were never trying to impress them. You were simply determined not to become them. And that purity of motive, that refusal to trade character for revenge, that's what I'm blessing now. Your kindness wasn't weakness, it was warfare. Every time you chose silence over spite, every time you forgave their mockery instead of returning it with pride, you advanced the kingdom. You tore down strongholds without ever lifting your voice. You broke cycles by refusing to mimic them. You didn't mirror their behavior. You mirrored me. And now, because you stood in love when it was hardest, I'm pouring back what you poured out. Restoration is coming, not just to your name, but to your heart. You've proven that you can carry my nature, not just my words. And now, I will clothe you in favor that no insult can touch, no label can reduce, and no lie can reverse. Because you chose kindness when cruelty seemed easier, you've unlocked a season of reward that will overflow in ways even your mockers won't be able to ignore. You stood in a place where everything around you looked shattered, dreams cracked at your feet, prayers unanswered for what felt like forever, and expectations bleeding silently in the background. And still, you looked up. You whispered hope when your voice trembled. You spoke life into things that had no pulse. You didn't deny the brokenness, but you didn't surrender to it either. You gathered the pieces in your hands, lifted them to me, and said, I still trust you. That faith was not weak. That was the most powerful kind. It was faith birthed not from what you saw, but from who you knew me to be. When nothing looked like what I promised, you refused to walk away. When the atmosphere contradicted your calling, you chose to stay in position. When your timeline fell apart, you didn't run to replace it. You waited on mine. And that waiting, filled with aching and silence, became sacred. You were surrounded by voices of doubt. Even your own thoughts screamed, give up. But you never did. You may have crawled some days, wept on others, but something inside you still clung to the truth that I wasn't finished. And child, that's what moved me. I don't need perfect confidence to move. I need surrendered trust. You handed me your broken plans, your scattered pieces, your unmet expectations, and still you said, I believe you can redeem this. That posture shook things in the unseen. Because faith in fullness is easy, but faith in ruins, its power, That's warfare. That's legacy. When you could have buried hope to protect yourself from disappointment, you dared to hold on tighter. When others gave you reasons to doubt, you searched for one more reason to believe. When your hands were empty, you still raised them. That's not small. That's everything. I saw the days when you sat in silence, staring at what used to be, wondering how it would ever be restored, and even through your questions, you didn't let go of me. You may not have seen it, but I was working in the waiting. I was shaping something beneath the surface that required the quiet, required the pain, required your patience. The pay wasn't punishment, it was preparation. The breaking wasn't abandonment, it was positioning. You didn't fail for not seeing results. You were being refined to carry more than you ever imagined. And now, because you believed when believing wasn't easy, I'm about to deliver what only I can bring. You didn't build idols out of outcomes. You kept your heart yielded to me, not just what I could do. That's why I can trust you with the next part. You're not chasing blessings, you're walking with the blesser. You're not demanding signs, you've already responded to my voice. That's the kind of heart I promote. That's the kind of spirit I crown. Because you saw the ashes and still envisioned beauty, you'll now witness restoration beyond logic. Because you stayed in place when pain told you to run, I'm sending answers that will chase you down. The breakthrough wasn't delayed, it was maturing. It was aligning. It was being built to last what broke you. And now it's here. Not in the way you expected. Not on the path you originally prayed for. But it's better, it's holy, and it's yours. You held on to me while everything else fell apart. Now I'm holding the pieces and breathing life into them. The breakthrough you believed for in brokenness is now becoming the foundation of a story only I could write. You thought they were just cries in the dark, silent expressions of your heart breaking open beneath the weight of everything you didn't understand. You wept when no one else noticed, in the stillness of nights where the only sound was your breath catching between sobs. But those weren't just emotions, they were prayers. They weren't wasted. They weren't ignored. They were loud in my presence, child. Each drop that ran down your face was received like oil poured out on my altar. The world sees tears as weakness, but I saw strength in every one of them, because they came from a place too deep for words, too real for performance. You didn't need eloquence. You didn't need a script. You just wept, and in that weeping, you let me touch the very places you didn't know how to verbalize. Those nights where you whispered my name and asked, "Are you still with me?" I was. I didn't pull away from your pain. I leaned in. I collected every tear, not symbolically but literally. I marked the days you wept over promises that felt far away, people you loved, situations that were crumbling, and wounds that wouldn't seem to close. Every one of those tears became evidence of a heart fully surrendered. They were the offering you didn't know you were making, the kind of sacrifice that doesn't shout but shifts everything. You didn't need to understand the process. You didn't need to feel strong. You just needed to come to me honestly, and you did. What you didn't see in those moments was what I was doing in response. While you were crying on the floor, I was assigning angels to war over your breakthrough. While your body shook under the grief, I was reordering things around you to align with my will. While you wiped your face and kept going in silence, I was writing a chapter where those very tears would become the rain that waters your harvest. You see, your tears weren't a sign of defeat. They were seeds. You watered the future without knowing it. You softened the hardened soil around your promise. You interceded when words failed, and because your spirit groaned instead of quitting, the heavens responded. That's why you're still here. That's why the enemy couldn't finish what he started. Because your tears reached me faster than any scream could have. And now I'm responding. Not out of pity, but out of covenant. I never waste what cost you so much. I never let grief be the final word. I always redeem what was poured out in surrender. And because you wept with me, you will now rise with me. I'm turning the mourning into dancing. Not because you forced yourself to smile, but because I'm lifting the heaviness you've carried for too long. What once broke you is about to birth something beautiful. What once silenced you is now making way for your voice to carry even more authority. You cried in secret. Now I will reward you in the open. I didn't just see your tears. I interpreted them. The ones you shed without knowing what you weren't even asking, I knew. The ones you cried when the weight was too much, I lifted it. The ones you thought no one noticed, I used them to build something eternal. The purity of your tears gave me access. And because you gave me that access, I'm flooding back in with comfort, clarity, and completion. You didn't need to know how. You just needed to release it. And you did. And now your weeping has become worship, your pain has become power, and your silence has become the sound of a promise fulfilled. I never missed a moment. I never missed a drop. And now I'm about to make every tear worth it. You stood in front of what looked lifeless, and instead of walking away, you opened your mouth and spoke what didn't yet exist. You didn't wait for the situation to change before you released faith into it. You didn't let the barrenness discourage your boldness. Even while your own hope was flickering like a candle in the wind, you chose to declare light into someone else's darkness. You comforted others while you were quietly wondering if comfort would ever reach you. You breathed encouragement into dry bones while silently praying for someone to do the same for you. And I watched it all. You weren't faking your strength. You were surrendering your fear to me with every word you spoke. You weren't pretending to have it all together. You were choosing to believe that your authority in me wasn't based on how you felt but on who I am. You spoke resurrection over dreams that others had buried. You stood over ruins and called them homes again. You looked into hurting hearts and told them healing was possible, not because you were overflowing, but because you knew where the source lived. You trusted that my power didn't need a perfect environment to move. And so, you became the voice I could use when someone else had gone silent. I saw how you poured out hope while holding nothing but unanswered prayers in your own hands. I saw how your words didn't just sound strong, they came from deep places of trust, where your soul had been wrestled into submission to my will. You didn't just repeat promises. You believed them on behalf of others, even while your own heart was aching for a sign. That kind of faith is rare. It's not performance. It's intercession born in the fire of waiting. And it's the kind of faith that releases miracles. You didn't wait for your breakthrough to begin blessing others. You didn't wait for your season to shift before you declared someone else's would. And that, child, is why I'm about to do something in your life that will silence every fear you've ever had about being forgotten. You see, while you were watering their gardens, I was preparing to bloom yours. While you were sowing strength into someone else's story, I was aligning restoration in your own. While you were laying hands on wounded places you didn't create, I was healing wounds in you that you stopped talking about. Nothing you did was overlooked. Nothing you spoke fell to the ground. You weren't just encouraging them, you were exercising faith, and faith always yields fruit. And now, I'm turning those words you gave away into waves that will return to you multiplied. Every time you spoke life over someone else's valley, you dug a well in your own. Every time you declared hope over someone else's heartbreak, you planted healing in your future. That's how my kingdom works. You gave when you had little, so now I will give you much. You trusted me for others when you couldn't see the path for yourself, so now I will illuminate your next step in ways that will make your voice stronger, your impact deeper, and your restoration undeniable. I am not unjust. I do not forget those who carry my heart, even when they carry it through tears. Because you dared to speak hope while holding broken pieces, you will now step into the season where those pieces are restored. And not just restored, repurposed. Your words are seeds, and I never let seeds die without bringing harvest. You spoke while tired. You poured out while empty. And now, I'm filling the very places that felt dry with an overflow that you will not have to strive for. Your voice carried others through. Now mine is carrying you. There were days when the heaviness pressed so deeply into your chest that breathing felt like an act of courage. You walked through fire that left no scorch marks on your skin but scorched your soul in places no one else could see. And yet, you lifted your hands. Not because the burden disappeared, not because the storm subsided, but because even in the chaos, you still knew where your help came from. You worshipped, not with perfect words, but with a heart that chose me over despair. You cried, but still declared my goodness. You trembled, but still raised your voice. You didn't wait for the breakthrough to begin. You sang in the tension, praised in the pressure, and chose reverence in the middle of resistance. That worship wasn't ordinary. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't surface. It came from the battlefield. It came from a soul under siege, refusing to bow to fear. It came from someone who understood that worship isn't reserved for the victory. It's the weapon that brings it. You didn't just sing, you warred. You didn't just kneel, you contended. You praised through panic. You danced through discouragement. And in doing so, you tore holes in the darkness that surrounded you. You invited my presence into places where the enemy thought he had dominion. That's what makes you dangerous to hell. Because you don't need everything to be right in order to declare that I am still worthy. I saw what was happening while you couldn't. I saw the spiritual assignments launched against you. I saw the invisible pressure, the sudden fear, the weariness that came out of nowhere. You were walking through things you couldn't explain, fighting battles that weren't just natural, they were spiritual. And instead of folding, you fell at my feet. That surrender allowed me to step into what you couldn't fight in your own strength. You didn't even know what you were up against sometimes, but you knew who to run to. And because you ran to me, I dispatched protection. I covered you with grace. I silenced what was whispering lies to your soul. I broke traps before you ever stepped into them. You worship, and I warred for you. What others called foolish, I called faith. What they didn't understand, I celebrated. You built an altar in a war zone. You didn't need a stage. You made your living room holy ground. You didn't wait for someone to lead you. You led yourself into my presence, even when everything inside you wanted to collapse. That kind of faith can't be faked. That kind of worship can't be taught. It's born in fire. And now, because you've chosen praise when panic was more available, I'm shifting things in realms you haven't yet entered. Your worship was never wasted. Your cries were never ignored. Every shout, every whisper, every tear-soaked melody became a shield around you, a sword in my hand, a signal that said, "This one still belongs to me." You didn't worship for attention. You didn't do it to manipulate results. You did it because your spirit knew the truth, that I was still God even when the evidence around you didn't confirm it. That kind of trust releases favor. That kind of posture opens access. And now I'm responding, not just with relief, but with recompense. I'm restoring what was shaken. I'm rewarding what was sacrificed. I'm revealing what was hidden behind the fog of warfare. You didn't let the storm steal your sound, and because of that, I'm now surrounding you with peace the enemy can't interrupt. This next season will not be defined by the war you've come through. It will be defined by the worship you carried through it. There were exits all around you. Easy ones. Quiet ones. Some even disguised as peace. You could have slipped out and no one would have blamed you. Not after what you endured. Not after what you gave. Not after how little you felt in return. What you didn't. You stayed. You stayed in the assignment when your emotions told you to run. You remained in the posture of surrender when disappointment tried to justify your escape. You didn't follow the feeling. You followed my voice. And I want you to know, beloved, I saw every ounce of strength it took to keep your feet planted when your heart was begging for relief. That's not weakness. That's warfare won in silence. People think staying is simple. But staying in the will of God when everything familiar is unraveling, that is supernatural endurance. You weren't anchored by circumstance. You were anchored by conviction. You didn't remain because it was comfortable. You remained because you knew I was still in it. Even when you were unsure of how I'd move, you were sure I hadn't told you to move. That kind of obedience is rare in this generation. The world teaches quitting when it hurts, quitting when it's slow, quitting when the applause fades, but you taught your soul to obey even when the atmosphere was cold and the path was hidden. You stood in places others abandoned. You held the line when others dropped the mantle. You fought through fatigue, and frustration, not for recognition, but because your love for me outweighed your need for answers. I saw how loyalty cost you. I saw how you carried weight no one acknowledged. I saw how your silence held back storms while others continued without noticing what it took for you to stay steady. You weren't stuck, you were steadfast. You didn't stay because you lacked options, you stayed because you refused to be disobedient just to feel immediate peace. And now, I'm responding to that kind of heart. I'm sending strength to the parts of you that got weary from holding on. I'm sending fresh wind to revive what staying tried to drain. I'm coming to reward what no one saw, because I never missed a moment of it. When others assumed you were just going through the motions, I knew what it took just to get out of bed and say yes again. I knew the inner war you fought to not walk away from people who hurt you, from promises that delayed, from prayers that haven't yet unfolded. I knew how often you sat in my presence and said, "Lord, if this is still you, I won't move." A trust wasn't small. That loyalty pierced through layers of resistance that most never press past. You've proven that I don't have to perform for you to stay. That's covenant. That's love matured. That's faith without conditions. And now, because you stayed, I'm about to open what was sealed. I'm about to release what was held until you passed this test. You didn't need an explanation, and now you will receive revelation. You didn't demand relief, and now you will walk in release. The gates are swinging wide not because you forced them, but because you didn't leave the post I placed you at. You were faithful when it was boring. You were devoted when it was costly. You remained when others ran. And that's the foundation I can now build something eternal on. A time of standing is about to shift into the time of sending. What you didn't walk away from, I will now raise up with fresh glory. And when they ask how you're still here, you will say, "Because I stayed when I had every reason not to." And He met me in the waiting. You stood at a crossroads where nothing looked like what I promised. A direction I pointed you toward didn't match what you had pictured. The steps I asked you to take didn't feel like progress. They felt like circles, like detours, like disappointment packaged in obedience. And yet, you took them anyway. You moved forward, not because the route made sense, but because my voice was still guiding. You didn't walk with full clarity, you walked with full surrender. And that made all the difference. You thought you were behind. You thought you missed it. You thought maybe the wrong turn happened somewhere in the silence, somewhere in the waiting, somewhere when the answer did show up on time. But I was never late. And neither were you. The path that looked like delay was not a detour, it was design. I wasn't denying you access to the promise. I was developing the capacity to carry it. I never intended for you to arrive quickly. I intended for you to arrive ready. And readiness often requires wandering through places that feel slow, uncelebrated, invisible. But what was hidden from the world was never hidden from me. I saw how you still walked when the scenery didn't match your expectations. I saw how you didn't give up when the road wound back on itself. I saw how you resisted the temptation to create your own shortcuts. You could have chosen ease, but you chose endurance. You could have settled for alternatives, but you chose to wait on the authentic. That decision built strength in you that no fast-track journey could ever produce. I wasn't punishing you with time. I was protecting the future by anchoring your trust. You didn't need signs every mile. You didn't need applause along the way. You just needed the assurance that I was still with you. And child, I always was. Door turns you didn't expect, pauses you didn't understand, and doors you thought were permanently locked. But behind the uncertainty, I was orchestrating alignment. What looked like delays were actually divine appointments, slowing your pace so you wouldn't arrive before the right season. If I had answered everything when you first asked, you wouldn't have been ready to hold it. But now, you've been prepared in fire, refined in silence, matured in waiting. You're not who you were when this started, and that was the point. You kept walking even when the ground beneath you gave no signs of breakthrough. You followed me through fog, through the unfamiliar, through terrain that tested your belief. And that faith, not just the faith to believe in promises, but the faith to keep moving when nothing confirmed them. That's why I've been blessing all along. That's why what comes next will be unmistakably marked by my hand. Because you didn't force open what wasn't ready. Because you didn't abandon the process halfway through. Because you didn't detour into compromise just to feel progress. I know you wondered if you missed something. But no, child, you followed me. You trusted me through the slow days, the silent nights, the weary steps. And now I'm redeeming what felt like wasted time. I'm collapsing the years of waiting into a season of sudden acceleration. What took others a lifetime will unfold quickly because you waited rightly. Your patience was not passive. It was powerful. It preserved your purity. It sharpened your discernment. It shaped your identity in me. And now I will lead you into places where the ground is already prepared, not because you arrived first, but because you arrived faithful. You didn't fail by walking a slower road. You succeeded by walking it with me. And now that road is about to rise beneath your feet with new speed, new clarity, and new authority. You trusted when the path looked like a pause. Now watch as I reveal it was always leading straight into purpose. You didn't need a stage to prove your devotion. You didn't wait for an audience to start showing up consistently. While others measured impact by attention, you measured it by obedience. You weren't trying to be seen. You were trying to be steady. And you were. In places where no one was counting, you kept showing up. When no one clapped, you still gave your best. When you weren't invited to the circle, you still loved from a distance. And when you didn't get the credit, you gave me the glory anyway. That's what faithfulness looks like, not flashy, not always celebrated, but immovable. I saw the way you kept your word even when it felt like no one else honored theirs. I watched you steward what I gave you with care, even when it looked small in your hands. You didn't wait for something bigger to become someone better. You became the better version of yourself right where you were. In the hidden places, the ordinary days, the quiet sacrifices. While the world applauds noise, I honor what's rooted in consistency. And your consistency has become a weapon in the spirit. Because every time you chose to keep going when it would have been easier to stop, you declared, "My loyalty doesn't depend on how I feel, it's anchored in who He is." Your faithfulness didn't demand attention. It didn't shift with moods or circumstances. It remained. When others gave up, you got up. When discouragement tried to drain you, you pressed forward. You knew what few are willing to believe, that the small things matter, that showing up again and again is a form of worship, that doing the right thing when no one's watching is when heaven watches the closest. I recorded it all. Every late-night prayer, every early morning obedience, every silent yes when you could have said, "I've had enough." Those moments have built a history between us that no lie can erase. I know the voices tried to tell you it wasn't making a difference. I know the enemy tried to convince you that your efforts were invisible. But I saw. I always saw. And I want you to know, your faithfulness spoke louder in heaven than any public recognition ever could. You may have walked into rooms unnoticed, but your spirit carried a fragrance that caught my attention. And now, I'm responding, not with noise but with weight. Not with clamor, but with glory. The kind that cannot be manufactured, manipulated, or mistaken. It rests on the shoulders of the faithful. And child, that's who you are. I'm raising you not because you shouted the loudest, but because you stood the longest. Not because you demanded something grand, but because you held tightly to what I gave you, even when it didn't look impressive. You didn't measure the assignment by its size. You measured it by your surrender. And now, because you prove it trustworthy with little, I'm releasing much. Not just in material things, but in influence that carries eternal consequence. You will speak and things will shift. You will move and atmospheres will change. not because of status, but because of stewardship. You didn't need to announce your loyalty. You lived it. And that legacy cannot be taken. I'm opening doors now that were reserved for those who didn't chase them. I'm revealing promises that waited on your consistency. Because you didn't treat my presence like a moment but like your home, I will make your life a dwelling place of my spirit. The rewards for faithfulness are not always immediate, but they are inevitable. And yours are coming now. Not as a surprise, not as a bribe, but as a response to a life that chose me daily. Your yes, whispered again and again in the unseen, has become a roar in the spirit. And now, that sound is releasing what's been waiting to find you. You didn't need to be loud. You just needed to be loyal. And you were. And for that, I say, well done, my faithful one. The wind was loud. The sky kept darkening. The waters rose around your ankles, and then around your chest. And though everything in you wanted to cry out, why is this happening? You didn't. You didn't shake your fist at heaven or point your finger at me. Instead, you reached for me. Not with polished prayers, but with trembling hands and whispered cries of, "Don't let go of me." You didn't deny the storm's violence, but you denied it the right to steal your trust. You didn't pretend it wasn't raging. You just refused to bow to it. You held on. And that hold, that simple yet fierce refusal to release your grip on me, shifted more than you realize. Many can praise when skies are clear. Many can sing when the seas are still. But few can remain when the waves keep coming. You didn't just remain. You chose to believe that even this chaos could still be a part of my plan. That kind of faith isn't shallow. It's forged in pressure. It's born when every escape route is blocked and your only option is to trust that the one who allowed the storm is still Lord over it. I saw your surrender. I saw the way you steadied your heart, not because everything calmed down, but because you remembered that I never leave. You had every reason to panic. You had permission to doubt. But instead, you turned your eyes toward me and said, "If you're in this boat, I won't jump." A declaration, even if you didn't speak it aloud, thundered in the spirit realm. It told the enemy that your foundation wasn't built on feelings. It was built on faith. It told the winds that no matter how they howled, you had already anchored your soul. You didn't ask me to remove the storm, you asked me to carry you through it. And I did. Even when you couldn't see me clearly, even when you felt like you were sinking, I was holding you. Every wave that hit you had to pass through my hand first. Not one of them reached you without permission. And even in what felt like delay, I was developing something in you that calm seas could never offer. You learned to discern my presence without needing visible proof. You discovered that peace isn't the absence of a storm. It's the presence of the Savior in it. You discovered that joy can still exist in grief, that hope can still rise in disappointment, that light can still shine even while surrounded by shadows. You learned to trust that I don't just calm storms, I also walk on top of them. And the same feet that walk through the waves have been walking beside you all along. I know you grew weary. I know there were days when your arms ached from holding on. But child, I was never asking you to hold the storm back, only to hold on to me. And because you did, you're coming out of this not with waterlogged faith, but with a spirit drenched in wisdom, in intimacy, in power. What you endured wasn't in vain. What you withstood wasn't wasted. The storm that came to shake you has only proven what was unshakable. You stood, not in your own strength but in mine. And now, because you did curse the storm, I'm speaking to it. I'm commanding the wind to still. I'm declaring the waves must bow. And soon, what terrified you will become your testimony. Because you didn't run, I'm revealing the reason behind the resistance. Because you stayed in the boat, I'm bringing you safely to the other side. And what's waiting there will make every crashing wave worth it. Not just peace but purpose. Not just rest but revelation. This was never to drown you. It was to deepen you. And now, you're walking out of the storm with something few carry, unshakable faith built in the wildness of the waves. And now, my child, as we step deeper into this unfolding, I must show you something that many overlook because they are too distracted by the noise of their surroundings. There is a hidden battlefield not on land or sky but within the choices of your heart. You must realize that every delay you've experienced was not denial, but divine resistance against what would have wounded your destiny. I stood in the way of things you prayed for because I saw the sharp edges hidden behind what looked like blessings. There were paths that glittered, relationships that appeared right, opportunities that seemed perfect, and yet I blocked your entry not to hurt you, but to protect the purity of your calling. You must understand, the delay wasn't punishment, it was preservation. I did not allow you to run ahead because what's on your life is too costly to be compromised by a premature door. Your future has timing written into it like breath into lungs. Every second I held you back was a second I was saving you from collapse. I know you wrestled with confusion in those moments. I know you felt the ache of waiting and the silence that seemed endless, but that silence was me stretching your discernment. I was training your ears to know my whisper, not the world's shouting. Because what comes next will not be navigated by excitement, but by clarity born from fire-tested stillness. This season is not about rushing, it's about revelation. You will begin to see that everything I removed was subtraction for multiplication. The subtraction was not lack, it was alignment. I removed what couldn't carry weight, so what I place upon you now will not collapse the foundation we rebuilt together. Let me say this clearly, what's coming next will not look like what came before. You are entering uncharted territory, and I am downloading blueprints into your spirit that will confuse those who only know how to copy what others build. You will not borrow ideas, you will birth originals. I have placed a new language in your mouth that will not make sense to the casual listener, but to the one whose spirit is tuned to truth. It will sound like the thunder of heaven. Get ready to speak what I give you even when your voice trembles. I will give you courage in real time, not all at once, but step by step, word by word, obedience by obedience. You don't have to feel ready. You just have to remain yielded. And my child, hear me on this. Those who underestimated your depth because of your quiet will soon be speechless at your emergence. I have been crafting you in secrecy, not because you were forgotten, but because what I'm doing through you required isolation. Public moments would have diluted the process. Your anointing needed silence to grow, and now it carries a weight that cannot be faked. When you speak, atmospheres will shift. When you pray, strongholds will tremble. When you walk into rooms, chains will loosen, not because of performance but because of presence. You carry my presence in a way few do, because you let me break you privately so I could rebuild you with heaven's blueprints. There's nothing wasted. Not the pain, not the misunderstanding, not even the seasons where it looked like nothing was moving. Everything has led to this hour, and this hour requires your full attention. Remove every distraction. Clean the room of your soul. Make space for the magnitude of what I'm about to do. You've outgrown old wineskins. Stop trying to fit into places you've already graduated from. I'm not taking you back, I'm taking you beyond. Beyond what they thought you'd become. Beyond what you dared to dream. Beyond what your past said you qualified for. And yes, some people will not come with you into this next stretch. That's not cruelty, that's clarity. They were part of the preparation, not the promise. Now walk with your eyes fixed forward. A cloud is moving. A pillar of fire is shifting. And I am walking ahead of you, commanding every storm to serve your story. Stay near. This is not where it ends. It's where everything begins. My child, now that the foundation beneath you is no longer trembling, I must teach you how to walk with unwavering steps in the midst of ground that still shakes for others. This is the stage where many falter not because they lack power, but because they forget purpose. Your strength is not just for survival, it's for strategy. I am assigning you to territories that have been ignored, places barren not because they were unworthy, but because others feared the cost of planting where nothing seemed to grow. You will be the one to break the dry soil. I will give you tools to till what generations abandoned. You will carry water into deserts and see flowers bloom in places cursed by neglect. Your footsteps will leave trails of restoration, not because you try to impress, but because you dare to obey when no one else does. You are not just walking into your calling, you are awakening destiny in places that forgot they had one. This next stretch requires sacred stubbornness. You must hold my word closer than your breath. There will be moments when opinions rise like waves to drown your peace. But if you fix your gaze on me, you'll remember what I whispered when no one else was watching. That whisper still holds more power than any volume shouted against you. I gave you insight in secret, not for fame, but for warfare. You are stepping into regions where your presence alone will provoke dormant spirits. Not everyone will celebrate your arrival. Some will question your access. Others will resist your authority. But I tell you, do not be moved by their voices. Be anchored in my voice. I have already validated you in wombs they haven't even entered. You do not need their applause to move forward. You need my direction, and I am giving it to you even now. Word by word, strategy by strategy. You'll notice that doors you never knocked on are opening. That's not coincidence, it's confirmation. I'm sending favor ahead of you to unlock what effort could never earn. But don't mistake open doors for easy roads. Favor brings friction. Breakthrough attracts battle. And you must be ready, not with defensiveness but with discernment. I am not calling you to defend yourself. I am calling you to walk in such undeniable clarity that confusion collapses in your presence. Your stillness will be louder than noise. Your peace will be sharper than attacks. And your wisdom will confound those who thought they could manipulate your movement. You will not be delayed again. What once tripped you will no longer touch you. I've trained your feet for terrain that used to injure you. And now, you're not just walking, you're advancing. Every step forward shakes something unseen. Demons that used to mock you now whisper warnings about your rise. Because what I'm building through you cannot be undone by sabotage, slander, or silence. Even your rest will carry revelation. In the night, I will visit you with blueprints too large for daytime logic. I will deposit answers in your dreams. You'll wake up with understanding that no textbook could teach. Pay attention to the quiet nudges. They are not random, they are divine cues. I'm synchronizing you with my timing so that you no longer miss moments meant for movement. This is your synchronized season where heart, vision, obedience, and timing align perfectly with heaven's rhythm. And I need you to protect this alignment with everything you have. Guard your gates. Watch what you allow through your eyes and ears. Be selective with your access. Not everyone deserves proximity. You're not being rude, you're being responsible with your assignment. The time has come for you to stop shrinking into places that feel familiar but keep you small. I am not asking you to fit in, I'm commanding you to stand out. You are the signal flare in the middle of fog, not for attention but for direction. Others will find their path because you refuse to dim your flame. You're not called to be light. You're called to be light. And light doesn't ask for permission to shine, it simply does. Now go where I send you, even if it looks unfamiliar. I am with you. I am for you. I am ahead of you. And what's coming next is too holy to be hindered by hesitation. Walk, my child. There's more. Always more, amen.